Good morning. So today we shall investigate the problem of motion of compact binary systems. That is the dynamics of the equations of motion of compact binary systems in the PN approximation. For that purpose, we shall start again with our action of general relativity. And from that action, we shall define a proper action which will describe the motion of a compact binary system directly. And from that action, we can vary it with respect to the particles and then get the equations of motion. And we shall see how this technique works at the lowest order Newtonian order, and we shall discuss how we can implement the same technique to higher order. So again, we have the action of general relativity, which will be the Einstein-Hilbert action plus a matter action. And let me first rewrite this integral over the Ricci scalar in a form which is quite convenient in practical calculation of the equations of motion, which is called the Landau-Lifshitz form, found in the textbook theory of fields by Landau and Lifshitz in the 30s, in the end of the 30s. So I will rewrite my scalar curvature in the form by writing exactly like G mu nu and the Ricci tensor R mu nu, which I write in the form, in the usual form, using Christoffel symbols. Where I have, so this is a Ricci tensor, and I will have some, I use my own conventions for the Riemann tensor. Where I write all the indices fully for you, lambda, nu, epsilon. And the rewriting of, in the form of the Landau-Lifshitz form is done by integrating by parts the two terms which involve derivative of the Christoffel symbols. So the Christoffel symbols are functions of the metric and the inverse metric and the derivative of the metric, space-time derivative of the metric. So you see that this term will be just a function of the metric and the derivative of the metric, the first order derivative of the metric, while this term will involve the second order derivative of the metric. And the idea of Landau-Lifshitz is to get rid of the second order derivative of the metric in the action by integration by part in order to get an action which is standard action, a more standard action in field theory, which is a functional of the field and its first order derivative. So you rewrite that by integrating by parts, and you can ignore the total derivative when varying the action. So I write that this is minus lambda of square root of minus g mu nu gamma mu nu for the first term, plus d mu square root of minus g mu nu gamma lambda mu lambda for the second term, and then the two last terms that I keep as they are. And now, in these two factors, I expand the derivative and I re-express the derivatives of the metric, which appear when I differentiate these factors, the inverse metric g mu nu, as well as when I differentiate the square root of minus g, and I express all the derivative of the metric in terms of gamma. And in that way, I get an action which depends only on the gamma factors and not their derivatives, modulo a total divergence, which I ignore, and therefore an action which depends only on the metric and the derivative of the metric. So the lambda-Lifshitz form of the action is obtained to be, and I would like to encourage you to redo this calculation to be convinced, is C3 over 16G integral d for x square root of minus g mu nu gamma minus gamma plus the matter action and the Christoffel symbol F indices mu nu rho lambda mu nu rho lambda. In that form, the Lagrangian associated with it is not explicitly generally covariant, because the Christoffel symbol, as its name indicates, is not a tensor, it's just a symbol. It does not vary. It does not behave like a tensor in coordinate transformations. However, the action principle built from that action will give you the action is itself a scalar, because modulo a total type derivative which will have no influence in the field equations. It is useful to introduce also the Gothic metric to be square root of minus g, the inverse metric, g mu nu, contravariant metric, and the inverse of the Gothic metric with lower indices is 1 over square root of minus g mu nu, the covariant metric g mu nu. And from that lambda-Lifshitz form of the action, you can write the complete action of GR in terms of that Gothic metric in a completely explicit form and rather simple form in terms of the Gothic metric. So the action becomes 1 over 16 pi j d4x, and now with that notation I can absorb the square root of minus g of the covariant volume element into terms that particle physicists and field theory theorist, field theorist like. That is, I have just ordinary derivative of my field in the form of the Gothic metric, and I recognize very easily kinetic terms, standard kinetic terms, as in usual quantum field theory, that are very nice. And the action, again, will be completely general. And also it can be rather impressive. It is actually rather simple, in fact. So I have two terms here, minus 1/2 of G, and so I have to put all indices correctly. Mu rho, nu sigma, mu nu, rho sigma. So you recognize a kinetic term, except that it is a little bit more complicated because of the spin 2 indices. Kinetic term in terms of that metric, minus 2G mu nu, G rho, G mu sigma, G sigma, G mu rho, plus the matter action. And again, this is completely general, that's the full action of GR, including all nonlinearities. As I mentioned already a few times, for doing approximations, it is good to start from an action in which we have directly imposed at the level of the action a coordinate condition. This will be the gauge fixed action, and for this lecture I will choose the harmonic coordinate condition which writes in terms of this Gothic metric divergence of the Gothic metric to be 0, which is equivalent to say that gamma mu, which is the contraction of the Christoffel symbol, is 0, since we have the relation that square root of minus G gamma mu is equal to minus the divergence of the ordinary divergence of the Gothic metric. So the gauge fixed action harmonic gauge fixed action will be obtained by adding to the Landau-Lifshitz action an extra term, which is minus 1/2 G mu nu gamma mu gamma nu, this gamma mu, or equivalently, in terms of the Gothic metric, a term which will be here, minus G mu rho, the divergence of the Gothic metric, D sigma G nu sigma. And I will have this factor. And this is my full action of GR in harmonic gauge. If we vary the gauge fixed action, we get the harmonic coordinate Einstein field equations in the form of an operator, a wave operator, d rho second order operator, and a wave equation in curved spacetime, which is given by 16 pi, the determinant of the metric, the matter tensor, and then a term which involves all the nonlinearities of the field equation, which depends on the Gotik metric and its first derivatives. And I have also the gauge condition, which is actually equivalent to saying that the equations of motion of the matter fields are satisfied, that is equivalent to the covariant, the usual covariant derivative, covariant conservation of the stress energy tensor, which is 0. Yes? Yes? Yeah. Or equivalently, you can have this form vary with respect to the metric, and then you will get exactly the same equation. But it's a good exercise to vary it directly in this form with respect to the Gotik metric. Yeah. So, in perturbation now, I will assume that the Gotik metric is a perturbation of the Minkowski metric. And I will rewrite my equation here in the form of an ordinary wave equation for H. I will still have my matter contribution on the right-hand side. But you see that if I introduce here the flat D'Alembertian operator this is not exactly what I had here, and so I have to take an extra term, which is H rho sigma, the second derivative of the Gotik metric, and to transfer it to the right-hand side. So I have to introduce a new source term in the right-hand side, which will be this source term to which I subtract a term which depends on the second derivative of H. So I will have now plus lambda mu nu, which depend on H, dH, and d square H. And this is the equation that we solve in approximations. And again, I already made this comment before. For mathematicians, this is a very bad thing to add a second order derivative of the field in the right-hand side of your equation. It's much better to look at the problem where you have a well-defined hyperbolic second-order operator acting on the metric. But for us, in approximation, we don't care because anyway, this term is quadratic in H and therefore will be small in approximations. Let us now define the Fokker action of a system of n particles. I will now specify the matter action to be the matter action appropriate for a system of n particles. So I will consider n trajectories, particles A, B, C, and so on. These will be time-like trajectories. Yes? This comes from the variation of the action. So this is the term in the Einstein equations that are non-linear in the metric. You remember the field equations are non-linear. There are many terms involving product, quadratic product, cubic, and so on, up to any order product of the metric and its derivative. And all that is contained into this term. This comes from the variation of this action, which contains many nonlinear terms that you have to include here. And physically, this is due to the fact that gravitational waves have energies, mass, and therefore they gravitational waves themselves. So I will have my particles here. I will have, for each of the particles, I will have a 4 velocity. Tau A will be the proper time of particle A. The position of the particle A will be yi mu. And the matter action will be the sum of the particles from A equals n of the mass of each of the particles and the integral from minus infinity up to plus infinity of the proper time of the particles. And the proper time of the particles is given by minus g mu nu g y a mu g y a nu, where the metric is evaluated at the location of the particle A. If I introduce the coordinate velocity of my particle, where t now I differentiate with respect to ordinary time, coordinate time instead of proper time. That is, this is t is yi 0 divided by c. Okay? I can rewrite this as dt and minus g mu nu at the location of particle A, Va mu, Va nu. The stress energy tensor associated with the matter action, the calculation, you have already done it because it was an exercise in our first lecture, in the first lecture of last Monday. So you have to vary the action with respect to the metric, okay? And you get in that way the stress energy tensor, which is the sum of the particles of integral g tau a ua mu ua mu, the 4 velocity of the particles, and there is a delta function, a 4-dimensional delta function to say that we should sit on the particle A, and there is a square root of the determinant. So that this is a true tensor. Actually, the delta function itself is not a tensor, it is a tensor density, and you have a factor here, square root of minus g, which makes T mu nu to be a real tensor. You have also an alternative expression of the T mu nu in ordinary, using ordinary three-dimensional variables, using coordinate velocities instead of covariant velocities. So this will be exactly the proper time in front here, which is minus g mu nu or rho sigma a VA rho VA sigma. And here you have instead the three-dimensional Dirac delta function still divided by the square root of minus g. Okay. I have now this stress energy tensor, and the stress energy tensor is the source of my field. The particle will generate the gravitational field itself. An important remark is that on Monday, you remember, we looked at the motion of a particle in some, with some metric in space-time. But in Monday, we wrote the equations of motion, and for the motion of the particle in a given background, in a given metric, the metric was fixed. And we got the geodesic equation, or rather, you obtained, when solving the exercise, the geodesic equation. And here, what is very important is that our system of n particles will be self-gravitating. That is, the metric on which the particle propagates is actually generated by the particles themselves. So there is mutual gravitational interaction between the particles, and so this is self-gravitating system that we consider. And as we shall see, the Fokker action is the right technique to use in that case for a self-gravitating system of particles. Now we have our T mu nu, which is here, and we can compute using our favorite approximation method the field generated by the particles. Using a post-Newtonian expansion, we can iterate the equations and get order by order, Newtonian order, 1pn correction, 2pn, and so on. We can get the solution of that equation given the source made of particles. So suppose that we do that. From T mu nu for particles, we solve the gauge-fixed Einstein field equation to obtain, using a Pn iteration, solving first at Newtonian order. There will be just the Newtonian gravitational potential between the bodies, and then plugging the Newtonian potential in the right-hand side, and then integrate again to obtain the 1pn correction, and so on. And in that way, we obtain a solution of the Einstein field equation, which is an explicit solution H mu nu, which will depend on the position x of some observer. Let me say that I have an external observer here which observes the particle at some instant t, so this will be a field point, the field point, while I have n source points. And this explicit solution will be at position x and at time t, and the time dependence will be through the particles, the position of the particle and their velocities and so on. So we get an explicit solution which I am writing. Generally, I denote it with a bar, but the bar was already used in previous lectures for something else. So I will write it as at h at mu nu, which is just an explicit solution of the field equation, and which will depend on the particles at time t, and the velocity of particles at time t, and in general, the acceleration of particles at time t, and so on. The derivative of acceleration and so on, of particles, and so on. Why there are acceleration? Because when we solve this system at Newtonian order, we get a potential, Newtonian potential. And then, at the next iteration, we plug this potential here, and we solve again. But here, there will be derivative of that potential which occur. And derivative of potential, or second derivative of potential, for instance, will generate velocities and accelerations also of the particles. So I will get accelerations. And then at the next order, I will insert this acceleration here. There will be again derivatives, therefore derivative of acceleration and so on. So I get a solution at point x and at time t, which depends functionally on the particles' position, velocity, acceleration, and so on. Now, the Fokker action is obtained when we replace that solution into the original gauge-fixed Einstein-Hilbert action. So, the Fokker action will be, finally, since we replace the metric as by an explicit solution depending on the particle, the Fokker action will finally be just a functional of the position of the particles, and it will be given by the Einstein-Hilbert term, which integrates over d3 d4x, and there will be a Lagrange density here, which corresponds to the gravitational part of the action, or rather the Einstein-Hilbert part of the action, which will be therefore a functional of the metric, explicit metric, which depend on x and the position, and so on. And then there will be the vector action, which is here, in which also the metric is to be replaced. So it will be an integral of dt minus g mu nu for that explicit solution. And the integral was a sum over b of the masses of the particles b. And the metric here is evaluated as a position b, but it depends also on the position ya, va, and so on. And here we have vb mu, vb nu, where you understand that I have taken this term and replaced the metric by this explicit solution. So here is the Fokker action. And now the equations of motion, as we said, follow from varying the Fokker action. So we shall consider the equations to be the variation of the Fokker action with respect to the particle A. And you see that there will be two terms. First of all, we will have to vary the action with respect to the positions and velocities of the particle which were originally present here and there, and also the A which is here, that is at the position of that. But on the other hand, there will be also a term which comes from the variation of the action with respect to the position, and the position coming from our replacement of the metric by this explicit solution. So I will have a term which corresponds to the variation of the original action, S, with respect to the metric. And this should be evaluated at the particular solution, say G hat, multiplied by the variation of the metric G hat itself with respect to the particles, using just the chain rule. And there will be also the term which comes from the variation with respect to the particle in the original action, which comes only from the matter action, which is this here. So we shall have SM matter action varied with respect to position YA and computed for the particular solution. Okay. But now we observe that since G is solution of the Einstein field equation, the variation of the action, by definition, with respect to the metric at G bar, is necessarily exactly zero. This is the definition of the fact that it is a solution, and therefore we see that the variation of the action with respect to the particle gives you the expected variation of the matter action that you would naively suppose if the particle would be moving in some background, in some fixed background, but now this relation is valid, has been derived for the metric generated by all the particles. For self-gravitating, yes?
Is zero. Okay, my problem is because of you need to stop at some point the time derivatives of the coordinates, because you're saying that G mu nu depends on the G dot V, velocity, acceleration, so on, right? And then I need to put.
I don't see the. Can you repeat the question? So yes.
My point is why to stop the chain rule?
Okay. Okay. No, I want that to admit here that I have my chain rule valid. I would like that you check it for yourself.
But it doesn't matter because of the Einstein's field equation, right? Or.
Yeah, okay. So, but as an exercise, please check that the chain rule is valid also for functional variations like that. So. Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a functional derivative. So, for instance, if you will have a Lagrangian depending on Q dot, I denote dl delta Q, which will be dl dq minus d over dt dl dq dot. So this is my notation. I include already it. Okay, so this is my notation for here. That's really, this is a notation for the functional derivative in this sense of the action in Lagrangian. Yes, exactly. Plus dt square of dl divided by dq dot if you have a generalized Lagrangian q dot dot and so on. Okay, so sorry for that. I have been a little bit too quick, maybe on that. So. Okay, so what have we? What is the bonus of having done that? Because it seems that you recover just the equation that you would naively write for your system of particles. You imagine that you have a fixed background. You take the matter action, you vary it with respect to the metric, and then say that, oh, yes, but the metric is the metric generated by the particles, and I'm fine, and I get the correct equations. But the bonus is that now these equations come from a Lagrangian. And the Lagrangian will directly give you the correct dynamics, which yields the correct equations of motion. And at the level of the Lagrangian, this is the calculation is much more simpler. And in particular, you understand that now there will be the crucial term, which is given by this term, the Einstein-Hilbert term, which will be absolutely crucial when we derive the dynamics of n particles, self-interacting particles. Naively, you will only consider the matter action, but that will be a big error. You need also to consider the Einstein-Hilbert contribution. And I will show you exactly how this works. At the Newtonian order, we shall just derive the Newtonian equations of motion, or the Newtonian Lagrangian, in that way. You will see this will be quite nice. And by the way, the Fokker action should be completely equivalent to the effective action that was discussed yesterday in the lecture of Ricardo, effective action of effective field theory. Yes, absolutely, yes. And we choose also a different name, Fokker action, in order to distinguish these two different languages, because Fokker, actually, he never considered the gravitational case. He used it for a problem in electromagnetism, but that's the same idea. Okay, so let us consider the problem in the post-Newtonian approximation, and we want to derive the Newtonian equations of motion of our system of n particles. First of all, we have to know what is the solution of our Einstein field equations at Newtonian order. So this is very simple. We shall use that equation and assume a positive. We have again box of h mu nu is 16 pi g over c4 g t mu nu plus all the non-linearities. Now, in the post-Newtonian approximation, I will have the components of my matter tensor And I will use the expression of the stress energy tensor using the coordinate velocity. The coordinate velocity will be equal to C for the zeroth component and to the ordinary velocity for the other components. And we shall assume that VA over C is always less than 1, much less than 1 for the approximation. So the 0, 0 component will be essentially the density of particles C square. And the density of particle, I will add a rho star here. The density of particles following my lectures on Monday, that will be the coordinate density of the particle. Okay? And here this is a three-dimensional Dirac delta function. On the other hand, the component 0i will be of the order of rho star C Vi, and the component Tij will be of the order of rho star Vi Vj. So this is O of C square, this is O of C, and this is O of 1 in the approximation. Huh? So, sorry. So if I am solving this system of equation, I will have box H00, which will be the matter term here, that will be 16 pi G over C4. Determinant of G is approximately 1 for Minkowski metric, T times T00, which is rho star C square. So this is approximatively rho star plus O of 1 over C4, which I can integrate. And this is Laplacian of H00, and you will have the retardation of the ordinary D'Alembertian operator. So you see that in first approximation, H naught naught will be 1 over C square. If I replace H dot dot there, it will be 1 over C4, which will be comparable to the neglected remainder here. So I remove it in first approximation. And I obtain that H naught is given by minus 4 U over C square plus O of 1 over C4, where U is the ordinary Newtonian potential satisfying the ordinary Poisson equation. Okay, and for a system of point particles, U is the sum of the particle Gma divided by the distance between the particles and the field point. So I will have, for instance, two particles, A, B. So this is in space now. I have the position YA, YB. I will have my field point X. And I denote the distance RA, RB, the relative distance RAB. And I will have a unit vector NA like that. And the other component will be completely negligible at that order because H0I, you see, it will be 1 over C4 times C, so it will be 1 over C3. So I will just write that it is negligible with this approximation, 1 over C3, and Hij will be of order 1 over C4. So this will be, it's simple, we can neglect that in first approximation. So I will replace this approximate solution into the full action to get the Fokker action at Newtonian order. So at Newtonian order, as soon as I replace it, I have so the Fokker action. So there will be a factor 1 over 16 pi, and I will rewrite the correct C's and G to see exactly how it should be of Newtonian order at the lowest order. And I have some work here to implement all that and to express it in terms of the metric perturbation. And I know that only the 0,0 component of the field at that order will matter. And so when we do that, we find that there are only two terms here that survive, which depends only on H naught. And these terms are only space derivatives of H naught. And sorry, I should add a at to the H because this is exactly the object that I called it in that way. And there is, so this comes from that term. It is very simple. All the other terms are higher order. And I have also another contribution coming from that term. And what I just said is actually not correct. Actually, the two terms that I have written here come from that term because you discover in the gauge fixed action, which is here, that actually at leading order, quadratic order in H, it's a divergence. It's a pure divergence at quadratic order. Pure divergence at quadratic order. If you replace this factor by the Minkowski metric, and you will get just d rho of the H and so on, you will see that this term is a pure divergence and therefore can be ignored when you do this calculation. So it will be only cubic. It starts only at cubic order, say H, GH, DH. So this term can actually be ignored in first approximation, and the two terms here come from here, and the minus 1/2 is just the 1/2 minus 1/2 which is there. And the H here is a trace, so this is minus H naught plus H Ig, but again, Hig is negligible. And when I replace H naught by the Newtonian potential, I get the action, and there is also the contribution from the matter term. So I get that the Fokker action is minus 1 over 8 pi g. You see here. Okay. Minus 1 over 8 pi g integral d for x of just simply du the matter action. And for those who are used to that, we recognize here the so-called Newtonian Lagrangian of Newton's theory. On the other hand, we have to deal also with the matter term. I erased the expression, but you have noted it. This will be minus the sum over the particle A. There will be the square root, which will start by there should be, we have to put the C's correctly. There is a C here. So this will be the metric minus G00, and G00 is minus 1 plus H naught naught with a factor which I don't remember. So we shall have H 00, which is what will be the best? If we have the metric G00 is eta mu nu plus same, say L mu nu, okay? And I have the Gothic metric, so square root of minus G mu nu, which is eta mu nu plus H mu nu, that's my definition. I have to relate H mu nu and L mu nu. And the result is that H mu nu will be L mu nu minus 1/2 eta mu nu, the trace. And I can invert that if I like, by L mu nu is H mu nu minus 1/2 eta mu nu H. Okay, so L00, which I want to compute, will be H00 minus 1/2 of eta 00, which is minus 1, and H, which is minus H00. So it will be 1/2 of H00, if I am correct. So when you do this calculation, you find that actually I will give you the answer. So this will start with C square. You'll recover the mass term, the usual mass term. And I have put the minus here. You remember that mass term, the relativistic mass term, is with a minus sign in the Lagrangian. It's a in the energy, but minus sign in the Lagrangian. And so then you will have plus VA square over 2 plus UA. And finally, we have to add all that. So let me rewrite it here. So we have these two results. And with these two results, we should reobtain the usual Newtonian Lagrangian for the motion of particles. Now, there is a very important point. Is that the first point that I have to notice is that you see here I have the potential A evaluated at the location of the potential U evaluated at the location of particle A. So we need a regularization. UA will be the sum of all the particles RB evaluated at A, and this is divergent because of the self-field of particle A. So with the regularization, we should have a regularization which does this automatically. We should obtain that the sum should be over B different from A of the GMB divided by all the RBs evaluated at A, which would be RAB in my notation previously. Need a regularization. My second point is that there is a coefficient here which is 1. And the coefficient which is here is not correct for the Newtonian, for the Lagrangian of particles. The potential term, the kinetic term would be correct. You recognize the usual kinetic term of Newton's theory, but the potential term will not be correct. So if you would have considered that your particles are in a given background and considered only the matter action, you would have an incorrect result with a factor 1 instead of the correct factor, which is 1/2. And of course, the correct factor comes from the Einstein-Hilbert part of the action, from that term, which is crucially to be incorporated. That was my remark of previously. So we have now this has to be transformed a little bit. Integral d3x of diu. I will write it as minus the integral. So I will operate by parts. So I will write it as d3x minus u Laplacian u. And I will discard the divergence term. And actually, you can check that u diu scales with 1 over r. So u diu scales with 1 over r cube. So when I will have a surface integral at infinity of this term, there will be a factor r square coming from the surface in front. So this will be multiplied by r square, which is 1 over r, which tends to 0 at infinity. So I will now have only this term, which I use the Poisson equation to express this term, which will be 4 pi g integral d3x u sum of the masses delta x minus ya, and this will be 4 pi g sum of the MA and position potential evaluated at A. And so you see that this term is exactly the one which is necessary to get a factor 1/2 instead of the factor 1 here. And finally, you get that the Fokker action is given by an integral over T of Lagrangian, which is just the correct Newtonian Lagrangian. C plus the kinetic term, usual kinetic term, plus the correct potential term for the motion of n particles in the Newtonian theory. And here I neglect higher order relativistic corrections. So we shall now come back to this problem of the regularization. Physically, you see the regularization which has been employed here is justified in Newtonian theory, because in Newtonian theory, we can use not point particles but extended bodies, and we shall not need any regularization because in fact, when you compute for extended bodies, you will find that there are cancellations. They are associated with the famous action-reaction theorem in Newtonian theory. And the result is that at the end, the result will be exactly this one. But we would like to have a mean to implement automatically the regularization. So, what is the problem exactly? Suppose that we have the Poisson equation for a source which is made of particles. So I will have the two particles, say two particles, delta of x minus y1 plus for two particles x minus y2. In order to solve the equation, I will use the famous identity from distribution theory is that the Laplacian of 1 over r is minus 4 pi, the Dirac function at location x. And I will write, of course, the usual result. Let me pose g is equal to 1 for simplicity. But when I want to compute the acceleration of my particle, I will have to compute the divergence of u of the potential, and I have to evaluate that at the location of that particle, which would be therefore minus g m1 over r1 square, and there will be the n1. I am using the same notation as previously. And there will be the contribution, again, I put g is equal to 1, 2 over r2 square, and 2i. And I have to evaluate that at x is equal to y1. And this term will be obviously infinite. Well, this is infinite. So I have to have a mean to evaluate when I have a function like u, which is singular at some particle. I have to have a recipe to give a meaning to the value of that function at the location of one of its singular points. I want also to have a meaning to the product of that function multiplied by some Dirac function at the, on one of the singularities. And I have to know how to differentiate this function. For instance, I remind you that the second derivative, spatial derivative of 1 over r of r, 1 over r, involves a distributional term, so it will be ni nj minus delta ij over r1 cube, and there will be a distributional term like here, delta ig delta of x. So we have to know how to differentiate singular functions as well. How much time okay, so in principle, okay, someone knows I started at 10. Okay, I should think I should finish quite soon. So there is an approach which is due to Hadamard and which gives an answer, definite answer to all these questions. And it deals with some function f of x which are singular at 2 points, for instance, or n points. And which admit near these singular points a power-like expression when you approach one of the singular points, when R1 tends to 0, with some coefficients Fa, depending on the direction n1, which is that one. Okay? Where A can be negative, and therefore the expansion be singular near the singularity. And here I am neglecting higher order terms. The Hadamard partie finie of the function f at 1 is given by an integral over the n direction, which is the direction of approach to the singularity, d omega n1 over 4 pi. This is the angular average of the 0th order coefficient in the latter expansion, f0 of n1. This is the finite part in the sense of Hadamard. It is quite a useful regularization. However, it has very important drawback, because if I denote this rather by f, who was regularized at the location of 1, you discover immediately that the product of two such functions evaluated at the location of one is in general different from the product of the regularized values of the functions. So this is an important drawback of that regularization. And on the other hand, and I will finish with that just, we have also a notion of the Hadamard partie finie of an integral which is divergent. An integral d3x of f of x in the sense of the partie finie. What do? You remove around your two singularities some balls, some spherical balls, say with radius s. Okay? And the Hadamard partie finie is defined as the integral over all space. I always assume that the functions are smooth at infinity, say with compact support, so I don't care with the divergences, with any divergences at infinity, or I assume that this is finite. I integrate over all space except in these two balls. So I integrate from R1 larger than S and R2 larger than S of d3x f of x. And when S tends to 0, this will diverge, and I can remove the divergent term. And the divergent term can be computed very easily from that expansion. So this will be actually a sum over the divergences, a plus 3 for a plus 3 negative, so that this is divergent. And there will be the integral, spherical integral of the coefficients of the divergent terms in that expansion, f a of n1. And there is in general a log term, a logarithm. And the logarithm signals something very bad which happened. That is divergences that can generally not be removed and will stay in our calculation, and in particular yields, poles, and so on. Very bad things. And in the logarithm, you have to include an arbitrary constant to adimensionalize the logarithm. S has a dimension of a length. And so, actually, the partie finie depends on two constants, S1 and S2, one for each of the particles. And once you have that, since you have subtracted the divergences, you can take the limit when S tends to 0, and this gives you the Hadamard partie finie of an integral. In practical calculations, this Hadamard regularization is very useful. It can be implemented on the computer very easily, but because of this drawback, it yields it does not work at a high Poisson-Italian order, which is 3pn order. And I will stop here and just finish this afternoon by discussing a better regularization and see other problems. Yeah.
So today in the afternoon there will be the last course by Luc, who won't be here tomorrow. So maybe you have to bomb him with questions in the afternoon. Okay. Starting from now, actually, you can start ask question now.
Hi. So in the first lecture by Ricardo, he talked about the degrees of freedom of general relativity and how to fix these degrees of freedom with a certain gauge. So you use gauge fixing in the action. So in some way you're fixing the degrees of freedom directly from the action, or yeah, I don't know how to count the degrees of freedom just from the action.
Okay, so the Fokker action has been defined for a general matter system at the beginning, and then we apply it to n particles. Okay. For a general matter system, so your matter system and the rest is vacuum, okay? And at infinity, this should be asymptotically flat. There are no other bodies and so on. So now, if we impose the harmonic gauge condition, we say that divergence H is 0. We impose it everywhere, outside the source, inside the matter, and even at infinity. In that case, it can be shown that the harmonic coordinate system is unique if the metric is to be satisfying it everywhere. From Ricardo's lecture, he changed the h by a new variable, h prime, differing by some divergence of some vector, d mu psi nu plus d mu psi nu, and so on. And he imposes that the new metric is also harmonic, and so this gives you that box of psi mu, the gauge vector, should be 0. Now, if you impose that this should be valid everywhere in the matter and at infinity, this implies that psi is actually 0. So the harmonic gauge condition is unique in a sense. But now, again, and maybe this is your question, you can locally be outside your particles and change locally your gauge. You are in vacuum and so on. And then there are many ways to change the gauge and keeping the harmonic conditions. You just introduce solution of the Laplace equation, for instance, 1 over r, and this will satisfy the gauge condition outside your source. But 1 over r, Laplacian of 1 over r is 0, but not in the sense of functions, but not in the sense of distribution. If you have your matter, Laplacian of 1 over r is not 0, but is a delta function. So this won't be 0 inside the source. So you can, the new harmonic coordinate system will be valid only in the exterior, not inside the source. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
If I may add a remark, so the construction that I did with the Xi that was eating all of the degrees of freedom of H but 2, it's only possible in vacuum.
Exactly.
Okay? Because otherwise, I mean, if it was possible outside vacuum, that would mean that you can really kill all of these U's, all these other degrees of freedom that are not radiative, which is, of course, is not true because they mediate the Newtonian potential. So they cannot be killed because they are physical. So that was just to demonstrate that there are 2 radiative degrees of freedom. And then I showed in a more general way, but just for the electromagnetic field, and I left as an exercise for the gravity field, that you can do the full decomposition, the general, that doesn't depend on the gauge. The 2 radiative plus 4 constraint plus 4 gauge. That is general.
Yesterday we did this, but with zero spin field. Yes. We did this, but with a zero spin field.
Yes.
Which is the difference? Because here we are using true spin field that have a true spin. Which is the difference in that guy?
The method of Fokker action, or equivalently of the effective action, works for any, in principle, spin field. In fact, it was introduced by Fokker for electromagnetic potential, spin 1 field. For scalar field, it works. It works as well. So it's a very general method. So the method will be the same. Yeah.
It was just to disentangle the difficulty. There is the Fokker method, which is really something that tells you about how to derive the potential. And then there are the details of the dynamics of the field. but these are two separate things. So you shouldn't. The difficulty that you hit in separating the polarization has nothing to do with the Fokker method. So.
In your last expression, you can avoid the infinities, but in the natural logarithm, when you go to 0, s to 0, that term is infinite.
So, which equation you are referring? Here?
No, the last.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Last expression.
Yes.
You can avoid the infinites, yes?
No. Well, this is just a definition.
Okay.
You take the integral everywhere except near the particle in these balls that you remove and you integrate over the rest. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you compute that integral, it diverges when s tends to 0.
Yes.
But using the behavior of the function near the singularities, which is given here, you can compute what are the divergent terms. And you compute them and then you remove them. This is what I have done here. So at the end, this expression is finite.
Okay. Okay.
This is a definition of regularization. So it's a definition, just okay.
Another question. In these lectures, you show us that the gauge condition is related with a infinitesimal change of coordinates, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, here this is a gauge condition, but actually it's a coordinate condition. So it's valid not only at the linear order as generally does a gauge transformation. So it's it's a choice of coordinate system.
Okay.
I think we often employ the name gauge, but I think it's better to say that it is a choice of coordinate system.
Okay, so that fix of infinitesimal coordinates have some relation with the place of the detector, maybe? Or
no, well, but no. Generally, you have to think that your detector is at some physical location, and you describe your coordinates.
Okay.
But obviously, there is also there are always the two views that are equivalent: either the passive view or the active view. I prefer the passive view where your detector is fixed and you change your coordinates.
Okay.
You can imagine also that you take your coordinate system fixed and you move your detector, but okay.
Okay, thanks.
It's just a choice of coordinate system. Yeah. Ah, yes, exact. Yeah, well. So if you have torsion, yes, the calculation will be a little bit different. Indeed, the Christoffel symbols will not be symmetric. And so, the calculation, the same calculation can be extended, but it will be a bit different, indeed, with torsion. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if torsion is a useful approach in gravity or not. In this
well,
case,
with torsion field, you violate the equivalence principle. If you consider the motion of particles, if you add the torsion, this will be the solution will be different from the GR solution only if the particle have spins, because the torsion is generated by the spins of the particles. For a compact binary system, the spins you would need to have maximal spins, I think, for black holes to have some difference with the torsion theory. And I am not sure that the difference will be very so. I think the difference is very small, and the solution is exactly the same as in the GR solution for particles without spins, as I did. Yeah.
Thanks.
Constraint.
Yeah.
Yesterday you talked about the constraint of the graviton. My question is
About
the constraint of the graviton, the mass of the graviton.
the mass of the graviton. Okay. Yes.
How you add the graviton in this action?
Yes. Okay, so it's a vast problem. At the linear order, you can add the graviton. So we can write an extra term, which will be plus mass graviton square, and essentially h mu nu minus h square. So you have at the linear order, the action will be integral d3x. Okay, that will be the linear, the lowest order, the action of GR. Okay, that I have written before. Okay, plus an extra term which involves the mass of the graviton. But this is valid only at linear order. That is linear order in the equations of motion. That is quadratic order in the action, in the Lagrangian. This was done, it's an old paper by Fierce and Paoli of 1939, I think. And since then, people have found a way to describe a complete theory up to any nonlinear order and involving a term like that, which represents the mass of the graviton.
Thank you.
Well, the X field is in the matter sector. So this is just the gravitational sector. You modify the gravitational action in a essentially unique way. And so the Higgs field will couple, as usual, to the metric in that of that action, and that's all.
Okay, we take one last question, and then we leave the remaining question for the discussion in the afternoon.
Returning to gauge invariance once again. In this Landau-Lifshitz approach, it seems that you are using two gauges at the same time, because we have harmonic gauge, and you added a minus 1/2 of the square root of the connection, that you are using two gauges at the same time. Is that compatible?
No, that's the same.
Two gauges at the same time. One gauge is the harmonic gauge that we use. And at the same time, you added minus 1/2 the square root of the connection, which is another gauge.
No, that's the same. But maybe there is the notations change a little bit, but that's the same. You have yeah. Okay, so I had the Gaussic metric, which is eta mu nu plus h mu nu. And so the gauge condition is 0. And so this means d nu h mu nu is equal to 0. But in the other lecture, this is h bar mu nu. So that's the same. We called it, probably Ricardo called it h bar mu nu. So that's the same condition, exactly.
Okay, so we resume at 50. So at 11:50, we have other complex.
Sure, sure.
Physical understanding of a gravitational wave. If I'm here and a gravitational